Why are you just standing there like a statue? Do you know how much this marble costs? You're lucky we have a quota to fill.
Sorry, sir. If you had stood in the Thorne Global boardroom that noon, you would have seen power arranged in leather chairs and polished glass, and at the head of the table, you would have seen Elias Thorne. His skin carried the richness of midnight coffee, a deep mahogany tone that seemed to absorb the room's harsh fluorescent light and radiate back a steady, quiet warmth. His voice didn't rise to command attention, it simply held it. He was not loud. He was not theatrical. He was the kind of man whose silence made seasoned executives straighten their backs and check their breathing. But that is not where this story begins. This story begins at night, when power takes off its tailored suit and tests its own reflection in the shadows of the unseen. Once a month, Elias left the charcoal wool suits in his closet. He folded away the silk pocket squares and the cufflinks made of rare obsidian. He removed the watch that could pay a full semester of Ivy League tuition and placed it in a velvet-lined drawer. He put on a blue maintenance jumpsuit, stiff with the scent of industrial detergent. He laced up worn, steel-toed boots that had seen years of miles. He called it the grounding. Elias did not go undercover to spy. He went to remember. You see, Elias Thorne had not inherited Thorne Global. He built it in a neighborhood the city maps tried to rename out of existence, a place where the pavement was cracked and the streetlights were often dark. He built it after watching his father mop hospital floors for 30 years, watching as surgeons and engineers walked past him like he was part of the linoleum tile. He remembered the smell of bleach on his father's hands at dinner and the way his father's back would ache in the quiet hours of the morning. He built his empire after learning that invisibility is the quietest, most pervasive form of violence. And he promised himself something long before the first million ever touched his account. If you cannot respect the man cleaning the floor, you have no business standing on it. So, once a month, Elias became invisible. He felt the weight of the floor buffer, the vibration rattling through his calloused palms. He breathed in the lemon-scented wax and the heavy air of an empty building. And once a month, the company showed him its true soul. Julian Vane never noticed. Julian had never built anything in his life except an ego that required its own zip code. He was a third-generation executive with a legacy surname and a chair that had been paid for before he ever learned to spell the word equity. If you watched Julian move through the office, you would see a man who believed the very air adjusted its chemistry to suit his lungs. He didn't see people. He saw leverage. He saw assets to be moved, obstacles to be cleared, and efficiency ratios to be tightened. Diversity initiatives, to Julian, were nothing more than PR cushioning, a tax he had to pay to keep the activists away from his door. He liked to say things in meetings like, "We need performance, not charity hires," or "This isn't a community center, it's a powerhouse." He was too polished to use slurs in the daylight. He knew how to hide his rot behind the jargon of meritocracy. But bias doesn't need volume. It only needs belief. For 3 years, Julian worked in the same building as Elias. He passed him in the elevators. He walked past him in the lobby while barking orders into his gold-plated phone. He stood next to him in the gym. And yet, he never once looked Elias in the eye. Because to Julian, a black man in a blue jumpsuit was not a person. He was a line item in the maintenance budget. He was a shadow that emptied the trash. Have you ever worked in a place where you felt unseen, where your presence registered less than the furniture in the room? Drop a yes in the comments if you felt that invisible man sting. Stay with this story because invisibility is a blade that cuts both ways. The executive floor hummed with the low breath of the HVAC system and the dull glare of fluorescent fatigue. It was nearly 10 p.m. Julian was alone in his glass office, pacing like a caged animal. His latest proposal, a plan to cut community outreach funding to pad executive bonuses, had been rejected by the board. Not rewritten, not tabled, rejected. He stared at his reflection in the dark window and muttered, "They just don't recognize vision. They're playing small." Down the hallway, Elias guided the floor buffer slowly across the marble. The machine whirred, a rhythmic, grounding sound. The marble began to shine like a dark mirror. Julian stepped out of his office, gripping a glass bottle of organic beet juice. He saw Elias, and something inside Julian tightened. It wasn't shame for being late or fear of the dark. It was the raw, ugly need for an outlet, entitlement looking for a place to land. Julian stopped walking. He looked at the freshly polished marble, then looked at Elias. He deliberately loosened his grip. The bottle fell. It shattered with a sharp, violent crack. Red liquid, dark and thick, burst across the white tile. It looked like a crime scene. Julian stepped back, feigning surprise for a split second before a cold, calculated anger bloomed on his face. Unbelievable, he snapped. Do you people even check the floors for hazards? You're just standing there like a statue. The buffer stopped. Elias turned off the machine. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a weaker man. Elias's jaw tightened, barely a flicker. In that moment, he wasn't just a CEO. He was his father's son. He remembered the hospital floors. He remembered the engineers. I'll clean it up, sir, Elias said, his voice a steady, low rumble. Just give me a moment to get the wet vac. Julian laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. A moment? Efficiency isn't optional in this building. Do you know how much this marble costs? We don't hire for optics here. We hire for performance. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne clashing with the lemon bleach. You should be grateful, honestly. Some companies wouldn't even let you near the zip code after dark. You're lucky we have a quota to fill. The insult hung in the air, vibrating with a history of 1,000 similar slights. Still, Elias did not move. Still, he did not react. That calm, unsettled Julian more than defiance ever could have. To regain control, Julian nudged the mop bucket with the toe of his designer shoe. It tipped. Dirty, gray water spilled over Elias's boots, soaking into the leather. Julian smirked. Clean my shoes while you're down there. They cost more than your annual bonus, I'm guessing. Consider it a tip. He pulled out his phone. He snapped a picture of Elias on one knee, the red juice spreading around him like a pool of blood. He typed a caption with a smirk. The help is finally doing what they were hired for. #level up, #know your place. He sent it to a private group chat of the city's young elite. Then he walked away, laughing. Think about that for a second. Have you ever seen someone use their phone not to capture a memory, but to document someone else's humiliation? What does that say about the person behind the lens? The next morning, the Thorne Global boardroom was a cathedral of high stakes. The leather chairs were filled. Assistants lined the perimeter. Julian was at the front, adjusting his silk tie, preparing to present a project he had stolen from a junior analyst. He leaned toward two colleagues and whispered, "You wouldn't believe the janitor meltdown I had to deal with last night. Some people just aren't built for high-stakes environments." The lights dimmed. The massive 4K screen flickered to life. Julian expected his title slide. Instead, the screen displayed a screenshot. It was his own group chat. The photo of Elias on the floor, the racist caption. The timestamps, the silence was thick. It was the sound of a career ending. The doors at the back of the room opened. Elias Thorne walked in. He wasn't in a jumpsuit. He was in a charcoal gray suit that fit him like armor, a silk kente cloth pocket square providing a sharp burst of color. His steps were measured. Julian's mouth went dry. "Leo," he stammered. Why are you in a suit?" "Security. Who let the cleaning crew into the boardroom?" Elias walked to the head of the table. He did not sit. He stood, his hands resting lightly on the glass. "You've worked here for 3 years, Julian," Elias said. His voice didn't rise, but it chilled the marrow in Julian's bones. "You've passed me in the gym. You've shared an elevator with me, and last night you looked down at me." Elias leaned in. "You never saw me. Not because I was hiding, but because your heart is too small to see anyone who doesn't have a title you can exploit. You called me the help last night, and you were correct. I am here to help this company remove the rot that threatens its integrity." Elias turned his gaze to the other executives, the ones who had laughed at Julian's jokes for years. "And I am here to help those of you who stayed silent realize that your silence was a choice." "You didn't insult a janitor, Julian. You insulted the founder. The youth center that trained our engineering division, that was my father's dream. The scholarship fund your department uses for tax write-offs, that was my blood." HR slid a folder across the table. "Effective immediately," Elias said. "Your employment is terminated." "But we aren't just stopping at a firing. I've reviewed your expense filings. The shoes I cleaned last night, you billed those to this company as a business expense. That is fraud. Our legal department will be in touch. Julian's father stood up, his voice trembling. Elias, surely we can discuss a transition. Elias held up one hand. The room went dead silent. We can, but not in this room, and not today. Character is not an age issue, and it is not a legacy issue. It is a choice, and you chose poorly. As security stepped forward to escort Julian out, Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded $5 bill, the one Julian had tossed at him in mockery. He placed it gently in Julian's hand. No one is beneath dignity, Julian, Elias said evenly. Not even you. Use this for the bus. You'll find that when you're standing on the sidewalk, everyone looks exactly the same height. Julian Vane was escorted out of the building he thought he owned, now a ghost in a world that no longer recognized his name. Elias Thorne sat at the head of the table and looked at his team. Invisibility, he said slowly, is not accidental. It is cultural. If you cannot respect the person cleaning the floor, you do not deserve to build on it. That evening, Elias walked through the lobby. He wasn't a ghost. He was a reminder. Justice is not revenge. It is restoration. It is the quiet correction of a world out of balance. From the other side of silence, toss stories, where real voices rise and truth finds its echo. If this story moved you, if you believe dignity should never depend on a job title, subscribe, share this with someone who needs the reminder, because every silence has a story, and we are here to make sure it is heard.